So we start this afternoon session. There's quite a lot of things to take away. This is a client talking about why they've done things differently and what the benefits have been. And it's Mike Notman's going to talk about the whole philosophy of the things that HTMA have fed into the Highway Maintenance Efficiency Program. And James is going to talk about the detail of how the total collaboration between the client, the prime provider and the supply chain has delivered huge benefits, and all that's there for people to see. So without further ado, you're on, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Can I start off by saying the title's wrong? It says efficiencies within procurement. It's actually as much about practice as procurement, and hopefully, given what's gone before, that'll be relevant. This after lunch slot's a bit of a devil, really, isn't it? I knew as soon as David asked me, I thought, I know what I'm going to be on. So, looking around the room, there's a few of you of my sort of era, and I know post-lunch is a bit of a nap time, so I shan't blame you at all if you do. I'm going to put this clock on for 20 minutes. There's a signal goes at the end of that which tells me to shut up, and any of you who've gone to sleep to wake up. So you listen out for the signal, and then it'll be okay for the other guys. What I'm going to try and run through fairly quickly is a little bit of autobiography. I'll keep that relatively brief and largely relevant. Bit of procurement back in the dark ages, and I was back in the dark ages then. Our recent experiences, and this isn't me, this is our recent experiences, which is Cheshire West and Chester. Our term contract with BAM Nuttall, and I know some of them are in the room, but I can't see them from here because of the light, so I'll keep looking around. Our term contract ends at midnight on Friday. So it's not a bad time to take a look back, and I don't think you can really look forward and know where you're going without having a look back and see where you've come from. So my recent experiences, our recent experiences over that 8-year period with that contract. And notwithstanding some of the stuff that came out this morning and Stephen Glaister's prognosis of the future funding, not least, I think you've got to be optimistic. You have to look forward in a positive sense. So why not onwards and upwards with our new term contract, which starts at 1 minute past midnight on Saturday morning. So the autobiography bit, and some of this is relevant, it's not just self-aggrandizement, although some of it is self-aggrandizement. David, when he invited me to do this slide, I thought, I wonder why that is. And I realised after a while, because he said he wants somebody with a long but largely undistinguished career in highways to act as a counterpoint following his award, which he said he didn't know about. And I thought, that's not going to be me. And then I thought of you, because he said, if it's not you, the alternative is Martin Duffy. So I thought, well, do everybody a favour. So I started, it's difficult to believe this, but I started 38 years ago with the road construction unit in the Midlands. And as part of a postgraduate training thing, they sent me on site, which is where I learnt man-to-man marking and working in an environment that was built almost entirely on a lack of trust between the client and the resident engineers and the contractor. I also discovered poetry. Well, I say discovered it, you couldn't really miss it. There was a T-van, one of Dowsett's T-vans, and somebody had written on the side of it in setting out chalk. It wasn't signed, so I don't know who wrote it, but it was written in an Irish accent. Then it was okay. It's slightly, perhaps could be considered as politically incorrect now, but I don't think it's that bad, even though I know this is being recorded. And I won't do the accent. But basically, it said, "Oh, mother dear, I'm over here, and I'm never coming back. What keeps me here must be the beer, the women, and the crack." I'll come back to that later. Anyway, inspired by that particular piece of art, but perhaps more so by the imminent closure of the road construction units, I headed off up to North Wales where they were promising a 10-year programme of road building. Rather got into this sort of playing with diggers in a big sandpit thing. Went to North Wales where, as I say, 10 years of road building. Being a proper, good old-fashioned ICE fifth adversarial set of contracts, we managed to spin it out to nearly 16 years. And that's where I really developed man-to-man marking and following people around and checking what they checked and then having long arguments about which bits of what was nearly right to take out and replace with something that was nearly as right the second time around. This is relevant, honestly. But eventually we had to accept that we'd stopped building roads, so I sort of settled down in Wales and worked for the local authority and started to maintain them. I then got the opportunity to move back over to England. I was starting to understand the Welsh road sign, so I thought it was time to assimilate myself back into my native tongue. So I got the chance to move over to Cheshire as what turned out to be the last county engineer of Cheshire, and in fact I think probably the last county engineer in England. I don't know if that's a claim to fame or not. Cheshire then got divided politically. I went west, some of the other guys went east. I now still do highways, but I also do some of the even darker arts of planning and waste management and regulatory services and all that sort of stuff. But to keep my fix of highways, I chair the engineering board for ADEPT, and I'm also, like Matthew, only not like Matthew, an HTMA advocate, and that sort of keeps me fixed up on tarmac and stuff like that. So going just briefly back to the Dark Ages, it says procurement in the Dark Ages, but I don't think it was procurement really. We didn't actually procure anything. We had shed loads of people who designed stuff. They knew what they wanted. They knew what the client wanted. They designed it to death, and then they stuck it on the table and said to the contracting world, you bid for it and you build it. And then people like me spent 2.5 years arguing over whether you'd built it, whether you should be paid for it, and stuff like that. But it wasn't really procurement. And I think it was constrained as well. Our actions were constrained by forms of contract that were very prescriptive and very constrictive, insofar as you were almost thrust into that adversarial position, largely between client and contractor, although I do admit that the adversarial side for me came to a head watching McAlpine and Fairclough at the joint venture meetings. That was always quite entertaining. They took adversarial behaviour to new levels. I hope there's nobody in the room who remembers that either. And I suppose looking back, even though it was a big part of my career, you think, did we actually get the best outcome for all? Did the contractors get a good outcome? Did the client? Most of all, did the road users? I think in terms of the product, they probably did. I think in terms of the value for money and the cost of some of that product, then I'm fairly certain that they didn't. So, our recent experience. When I moved to Cheshire, within a matter of months, we just re-let the contract. I've said there it's a second generation contract. By second generation, I mean it was Cheshire DLO, was let to Jarvis. This was then second generation let to Nuttall, and that was the contract that effectively that I inherited when I moved there. And as I say, it ends tomorrow. I think it's been a transition from traditional good old-fashioned Shire County DLO through the Jarvis one, which was pretty traditional ICE fifth head-to-head stuff. And we then transitioned over the last 8 years. We set off with this explicit intention of working together. And I think setting off with an explicit intention is not a bad way to go. It wasn't a biggish contract, the biggest. It certainly wasn't a Birmingham PFI. But in that time, for us, for Cheshire West, it turned over 225 million. Cheshire East, who were obviously the other half of Cheshire, about the same. So you're talking about 450 million, 200,000 ordered works for us, and a variance at the last meeting, and it's probably come down a bit since then, of somewhere around 10 grand. And we've worked very hard on that. We worked very hard from the beginning not to have a variance, but we did. It built up and it built up. We then worked very hard to get rid of it, and we then worked very hard to keep it got rid of. In terms of the efficiencies of the contract, I can't put a figure on that, but if you start timesing QSs by salaries and the time that people would have spent arguing over £500,000 worth of variance, I suspect we saved that many times over. And the benefit of hindsight is always handy, but looking back on that 8 years, it didn't start brilliantly, it didn't start easily. I don't think these things ever do. But after about 6 months, once everybody got to know everybody, we started to move forward. But we did, as I say at the time, the critical intention was we would work together and we would try and achieve common goals. Just two or three, a handful of the specifics that we did, because I think it's worth getting down. We've talked some fairly high-level stuff this morning. I think it's worth getting down to sort of one or two of that, and this is what we did things. We set out deliberately to put in place contract management teams. We felt that as a contractor, life's difficult enough trying to deal with the job. If we make it more complicated by having 100 clients, they've all got slightly different angle on things. So we took away the customer, the political, the statutory interface, put all that to the back of the room, created contract teams. That was our single, very sort of intense point of contact with BAM Nuttall, so that we got away from that idea that you've got all these clients swilling around. We also looked very, very hard at the coaching and training, and we put a lot of joint effort into coaching and training with those groups of people who were going to be the bridge between the client and the contractor. And we also found that that approach helped build personal accountability. Rather than conveniently forgetting who'd asked them to do it in the first place, the personal accountability was there on both sides of the relationship. And we also worked very, very hard on systems. And I don't understand a great deal about systems, but I know we worked very, very hard on them to make them simple, to make them talk to each other, and to make them give us information that we could use, and not a lot of information that we didn't need. And perhaps the most important, we moved away from what you might call a fairly typical design cost remeasure to an upfront quotation and planning process. So we identified pieces of work, our people worked them up, they then sat down and we had genuine early contractor involvement with individual items of work. They were then quoted, and mostly, certainly by the end of the contract, the quote came out, and that was then eventually the price for the job, which is a big factor as to why we didn't have the disputes at the end of it. And as a consequence of that, we got good, simple records, because if we did have anything to go back to, we had good records, and we could go back there, and they were agreed records, and that took a lot of the sting out of things. But I suppose most important of all was the people and how we went about the people, because as I said, there were second generation DLO, there were relationships still between client people and DLO people that were, to say the least, not entirely healthy, not in a personal sense, but in terms of contract management. So we had to work very, very clearly with those people to address that culture, to address the relationships, to get away from them and us, and to move to an us with a single goal. We did that from the top. We did that with joint management team, with joint shared objectives, which we indicated clearly to the workforce that it was a joint objective. It wasn't something the council were telling Nuttall to do, and it wasn't something Nuttall were doing that the council weren't entirely happy with. And that, again, didn't happen or didn't change overnight. And most critically, most importantly, particularly in the contract management teams, we picked the right people, because we knew the people who could do this and we knew the people who didn't want to do it or wouldn't do it. And some of them were found alternative useful employment, and some probably weren't. But the ones who got on were the ones who sat down with Nuttall and knew what we were about and got on with it. So I suppose that begs the question, really, if it was that damn good, why change it? And it was good, and looking back over the whole of the period, you know, we had virtually continuous improvement from start to finish. So why change it? I guess several reasons, really. One, obviously, is times and circumstances change. The contract had been going for 8 years. After 7 years, the other half of Cheshire East went their own way and went for a separate, different procurement. And we could do another hour on that, but it's probably best that we don't. Cheshire West and Cheshire East, as you can imagine, splitting apart, a lot of commonality, but a lot of political differences. So we probably weren't going to be in a position to go forward together. It was a natural break in the contract. We were into the extension zone, so there was a natural time for the contract to end. And Our council in particular wanted to and felt it needed to embrace the localism agenda, and there's been references this morning to some of the pressures that that brings from politics, from communities, and I don't think we could have carried on just doing the same, albeit with some continuous improvement, and address that localism agenda and some of our politically inspired issues. And we're firm believers in collaboration. So we wanted to get back the economy of scale that we'd lost with the split with Cheshire East. So we looked for a partner. I don't want this to sound as if Shropshire were a sort of dormant sitting there waiting for somebody to sidle up to them and chat them up. Far from it. I think if we put somebody from Shropshire in my position, I hope and expect they would be saying exactly the same in terms of looking for a partner, an economy of scale, etc. They're very similar to us. We have a political affinity, we have geographical proximity, similar demographics, similar size, and so on and so forth. So there were a lot of reasons why ourselves and Shropshire were ideal partners to collaborate, which is what we did in terms of the procurement. And what we tried to include in that procurement, we had tried to include quite a lot actually. We certainly wanted the best from the two previous contracts, their contract with Enterprise and ours with BAM. Accepting that we had to have some compromise along the way. The two were not entirely compatible, and there was a little bit of give and take in there, and I hope that's not lost us any opportunities. We also wanted to tell the sector what it was that we wanted and how we were going to judge what we wanted. So the client evaluation model, or the evaluation model the clients used, we tried to make very clear, very consistent, and very transparent, so that people would know what we wanted and how we made that judgment. And we also tried to build in some of the things that we'd built in previously, as I said, about developing the culture of the people taking part in the contract. Also about a continuous development and innovation fund. In the Nuttall contract, it happened largely because we made it happen. In this contract, we put it in there as part of the contract so that it would happen. We tried within the contract to incentivise, I think, for these contracts to be successful, there has to be some incentive for all concerned in terms of performance, in terms of cost, and dare I say, even a degree of competitiveness. Performance criteria, we have shared responsibilities to deliver against those. We don't just walk around checking what the others are doing. And there is an efficiency discount. Last but not by no means least, there was an efficiency discount should the same contractor have won both contracts, which indeed is what happened. And we also include, and there's a little bit of a plug here for a slightly pre-HMEP work, but it was a piece of work that was done by the HTMA with some input from Adept and other colleagues from within the Association of Consulting Engineers, I think, possibly CIHT. I hope I've not forgotten anybody. And that was a piece of work on contract indexation, because I think it was felt that the contract indexation, in fact, you told us, the contractors told us, the way contract indexation works in term contracts, we're pricing a risk that you may well never encounter. And that piece of work was done. It exists. We've included it in our contract, and I hope within 6-12 months we'll come back and tell you that it's been beneficial. And I know one or two other people are starting to look at it. But that facility is available already, and it sits within the HMEP portfolio. Sorry, that was a Mostak finger there. And we researched the market. I'm slightly reticent about this because one of my neighbouring directors in a neighbouring authority, I think I'd better say, currently is on long gardening leave for researching the market. Unfortunately, I believe he only researched one part of the market. We tried to be a bit more even-handed than that, and we spoke to a lot of contractors, and we spoke to a lot of you in the room, I'm sure, and we spoke to a lot of the people who you speak to and who you work with, so that we've got a very, very good feeling for what was happening, what was changing. It's 10 years since we last let a contract, and a lot of people, short memories, people move on. We hadn't got that set of skills, therefore we needed that advice, we needed your input. Plenty of risks as well, but again, if Mostak and the DFT colleagues are still here, I probably won't dwell on risk. It's a bit of a sensitive area at the moment. But what we tried to do was recognise that in 10 years there's a need to reflect where some of those risks can best be treated, and there's been a reference in the PFI presentation to just that. But again, we did that on your advice because you're a site closer to it, that's your day job. And we expect benefits. We expect the best that the two councils can deliver by combining our resource. I think we more than made up for resource and skills that we've lost over the last 10 years. So we think we've built a good contract. It's been influenced by the experts. It's been influenced by many people in this room, contractors and their clients. It's been influenced by both, so we feel we've got a contemporary, modern contract, not something that's 10 years old and has just been updated and the date's changed. It's certainly got flexibility. We've got room within that contract for more services within our council. We've got room within that contract. There are mechanisms for more councils. And we have a firm belief that when that almost Armageddon picture that Stephen Glaister painted this morning, and I found that graph, the minus 28% the other day. Somebody sent it to me. They said, you want to see this? Minus 16% concessionary fares. And they'd also underlined the highway maintenance bit. And I'm still trying to get somebody to tell me, as Stephen obviously was, is that extra over what we've been told already? But if and when that hits, we're going to have, I think, a lot of authorities who will be looking to contracts like ours because I think they won't have time to get themselves out of problems if they've not thought about it already. And we've also tried to build in a distinct localism flavour with the contractors looking at issues, again, that have been talked about this morning, about supply chain, about local employment, about proximity to the community, about a greater community involvement, not necessarily control. Heaven forbid we don't want little Piddlington Parish Council setting out with a blacktop machine on a Saturday afternoon and stuff like that. But we feel that we have to provide that or enable that influence so that the work that you do on our behalf is influenced by the local communities, but at the same time is delivered within a strong asset management-based framework. And that's quite a challenge, balancing those two off. And yeah, I said there's got to be a financial benefit. There was a financial benefit of the two authorities not procuring two separate contracts. 250,000, I don't know what it was, but both ourselves and Shropshire feel that we saved something of that order simply by procuring together. The fact that we both procured the same contractor came with it, or brought with it, something just less than 2% efficiency saving as of day one, if you like. Not a huge amount, 2%, but if you go back and think about 225 million and 2%, you start to generate some benefit. And that's day one, and I feel, and I know our new contractor feels, there is a lot more to come, and there's a lot of potential within there. So, and I can't see again because of the lights, but wherever Ringway are sitting, it's over to you fellas as of Saturday, and best of luck. In summary then, I think we've come a long way. I certainly have. Feels like a long way. And life feels very different to the way it used to back then. I've had a little bit of crack along the way as well. I wouldn't want to make it sound particularly miserable. But we've got a long way to go. Some of the figures that have been painted in terms of the pressures on local authorities and the different graphs of doom, the ones that say that by the time in 10 years' time you've paid for adult social care and having the bins emptied, there won't be anything for highways. Something's got to happen there because the country's going to grind to a halt otherwise. And I don't think for 1 minute necessarily good procurement, good collaboration and good contracts will fill that gap. They won't, but they will make a difference. And I think if we present ourselves as an industry that's working together, that understands what it is we're doing and can critically start to paint the significance of the highway network, not just in terms of we need some money because the roads are in a state, but we need some money to fix the roads to help you create this growth and social well-being, then I think there's a fighting chance that we'll come through. And last, then, yeah, contract specs, systems, all of that, fine, it'll take us a long way. But if the people who are in this room, and more critically perhaps the people who aren't in this room, are prepared to sit down, work together, pool resources, share common goals, then that to me will be the critical determining factor, and the contracts and systems and and all of that will largely follow. So my clock's not gone off. I don't know if that means I never started it. Yeah, it means I never started it. So on that basis, David will tell me off when I get back, so I shall go this way. Thank you.